Welcome to Sports Chaplains Connect, a weekly podcast where you'll hear the journey of someone serving in sports ministry. It's insight, wisdom, discernment, and encouragement for serving the men and women of sport. It's time to connect. Here's your host, Bill Houston.
And Bonnie Bement, we appreciate that introduction. Thank you so much. And welcome to a brand new year, folks. Good to have you with us as we visit with Pat Richie. Pat is a former chaplain in the National Football League. He was the chaplain with the San Francisco 49ers. We're going to learn more about that, where the Lord has him now, and just talk a little sports ministry. So, hey, Pat, Happy New Year to you, man. Thanks for being here.
Oh, Happy New Year to you, Bill. Glad to be here.
Well, let's talk about how you became involved in sports chaplaincy. I always like to begin with a little background and just hear how the Lord brought this ministry opportunity into your life. So let's hear the Pat Richie story.
Let's see. Well, I played college football in the mid-1970s at Little Moorhead State in Minnesota. And then I joined the staff of Campus Crusade for Christ. And with our Athletes in Action ministry was already in place and been going for a few years. My first assignment was at Notre Dame. And there I worked with football players and basketball players. So that was in the late 70s, early 80s. 1981, my wife and I had decided that we wanted to work with a little older group of people, and Athletes in Action had a burgeoning or a beginning sports ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, look, we think you'd be qualified to do this, but there's a lot of people who'd like to do it. And, a few teams want somebody to come. And so they said, we're going to put your resume out there to these teams. They were the Kansas City Chiefs and Royals, the San Francisco 49ers and Stanford football,
Mm-hmm.
and the New York Mets and Jets. And they said, look, if anybody wants you, you can go there. So they put the resume out. They called back a week later and said, well, you're the first pick of all three teams.
Wow.
Now, all three cities, where do you want to go? And my first thought was Kansas City, because I'm from the Midwest, grew up in Minneapolis. But eventually the 49ers called back and said they and Stanford really wanted us to come out and talk to them. So in April of 81, or maybe March, 81, took first trip ever to San Francisco, and met with John McVay, who was Sean McVay's grandfather.
Huh.
He was the 49ers general manager. The team had been 6-10 the year before and 3-13 the year before that. And he said, look, we'd love to have you come join us. And so I agreed to that morning. And Ronnie Lott we had just drafted him. So he and I have the first same day of work in 1981. I go over to Stanford and meet the head coach of Stanford at the time. And he goes, look, we'd love to have you come here. He goes, by the way, before you leave, our sophomore quarterback's walking up the stairs. I'd like you to meet him. We think he's going to be really good. I said, Pat, this is John Elway. He's going to be our quarterback here in the future. And so I met John Elway when he was a sophomore that day. And so I ended up being the chaplain of both Stanford sports and 49ers football. The 49ers win their first Super Bowl that very first year that I'm there. It's when Dwight Clark catches the pass in the back of the end zone.
Yes.
That we all have seen that picture. I was there. My wife was pregnant with our first child, about 8 months. We thought we were going to have puppies right in the stadium. And they asked me to go with them to Detroit for the Super Bowl 16, where we beat the Bengals. And the Stanford got so big in a couple of years, I asked them to bring somebody else into Stanford. Then in 1985, the San Francisco Giants asked me to also be their team chaplain. So I'm doing the baseball and football. And in 1992, the San Jose Sharks asked me to be their team chaplain.
Wow.
So when I retired from full-time sports ministry in 98, I was at the time chaplain of 3 professional sports teams.
Oh, my goodness. Wow. How in the world did you balance all of that? I mean, I know how busy it can become just being the team chaplain for one team. I mean, you're doing 3. I mean, that's amazing. I mean, how did you keep the calendar going?
Well, the key was I was full-time. With Athletes in Action, you're a full-time staff member and you raise your own support, but I wasn't trying to balance a church ministry or teaching on the side. So I was doing that full-time. The hardest month was August, because we were at training camp up in Northern California. And then, the Giants are also playing games at home. They're in the middle of their season. The Sharks also asked me to travel with them. So I traveled with the 49ers in all their games. And the Sharks, kind of whenever I wanted to or I could, So I only rarely went on a trip with the Giants.
Okay.
So even though they play a lot, of course, they're playing 162 games a year. It's hard to be at every one of those games, and I certainly wasn't. I was
Mhm.
at on Sundays at home doing cheap chapels and probably stopping by the locker room one or two other days a week for them. So it was busy. I mean,
Yeah.
it was really, really busy. There's no way I could have done Stanford. I mean, after just a couple of years at Stanford, the ministry had grown to include many, many sports, and we had women's golfers, guys on the men's basketball team, but the entire football, the football team was a big part of the work. So it
Yeah.
was just too much work, and they really deserve somebody on their own.
So when you talk about serving in a team chaplain capacity in Major League Baseball, the National Football League, and the NHL, how did you find the ministry vary, or did it at all in terms of their response, the way you had to present, the chapel settings? I mean, what were the differences you experienced?
In football, most of the guys had grown up with some sort of a church background or experience. Now, there's some dynamics because I did it for so long, it was like a couple decades. So,
Hmm.
the group in 1981 with the 49ers, one of our defensive linemen said, Christianity is really a wide receiver and quarterback thing. And I told that to Jim Zorn once, and I said, I guess defensive linemen don't think you and Steve Largent are all that tough. And he just goes, "Are you saying we're wimps?" I go, "No, no, Jim. I appreciate what you were doing in 1981. You're ahead of the game."
Yeah.
So, but things really changed in the NFL. I think, and I did an interview for GQ magazine years ago, and I said, "Look, things changed in 1986. Reggie White and Mike Singletary coming into the league, and now you got tough guys that are really outspoken Christians."
Mm-hmm.
Which, and I'm not saying that Steve and Jim weren't tough guys, but we didn't have like two of the most vicious players in the NFL that are Christians as we did in '86. So that started to change some of the dynamic in football. And a lot of guys, and we'd have large chapel services. A lot of guys at Bible study, pretty common. Baseball was kind of in between that and hockey, where you have a smaller squad, 25 guys, 24 guys, and depending on the team, some teams had big groups. We had a pretty big group of Christians on the team, good turnout at chapel,
Mm-hmm.
and pretty good. 1986 too, we made a trade, brought Dave Dravecki, who was a very strong Christian to the Giants baseball team,
Yes.
made a difference for us there too. And he joined a small group of Christians on that team, and so that kind of grew a lot. Hockey's completely different. You have a lot of, especially back in the early '90s, we're talking about mostly Canadians and Russians or Eastern Europeans,
Right.
many of whom had never even prayed. I can remember the first chapel literally telling the guys, "Look, here's what it's going to be. It's be about 12 minutes long. There's no singing. There's no collection.
Right.
I'm going to open in prayer, which means I'm going to close my eyes and fold my hands, and I'm going to talk to God."
Mm-hmm.
And when we do that, you're welcome to close your eyes, fold your hands, and just be quietly, pray along with me. So
Mm.
I said, "Okay, well, we're going to pray now." And literally, I looked around the room, I could see the guys peeking to see if the other guys were going to do it.
Ah.
To actually, because they're looking, but then eventually they close their eyes and bow their heads, and I say a short opening prayer. And then when I was done, I looked up at them, and they were smiling, and they were like, "I've never prayed before." I prayed. And so I had a 49er come that day. He gave a short chapel talk. And afterwards, the guys go, "This is great. I mean, this is wonderful." So, chapels, really, that wasn't chapel. There was some ministry in the NHL, but it was a little spotty, but nobody had a regular chapel service or a chaplain that was
Yes.
traveling with the team. And so that took off. And fortunately, it seemed like every game I went to, they won. So the head coach insisted I come on every game and every road trip in the playoffs. And then
Yeah.
the crazy thing is, I go on the road trip in the playoffs. The team barely makes the playoffs. They were the eighth seed. No A seed had ever beat a number one seed, but we beat the Detroit Red Wings that year.
Yeah.
So
About
they
that.
really liked me at the Sharks.
Yeah. 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 You were doing a
Yeah.
great job.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so exciting. Hey, Pat, let's talk about. I have heard the story, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you were, if I can use the term, on the ground floor of this whole idea of players getting together. I'm talking about the NFL now players getting together at the end of a game in the center of the field, kneeling down and praying together. Were you involved in the opening days of that kind of thing going on? And what can you tell us about that?
Well, look at it. It's 1990, and we were the two-time defending Super Bowl champions, winning in '88 and '89. And going into December, both us and the New York Giants were undefeated. We were both 12-0. Giants were a terrific team. And one day in the shower, I think this is where God likes to talk. He said, I want you guys to pray with the other team. It had never happened before. Nobody had ever prayed with another team. And so I called my friend Dave Bratton, who was the chaplain of the New York Giants at the time. I go, Dave, look, God's going to give me this vision. What do you think? This game is going to be huge. It'll be the number one Monday night game ever watched. And Monday night was bigger back then than it is now. That's ever been on TV. And I think the Lord's telling me we should pray as a team together. And my first thought was, well, after a game, who knows what happens? Maybe we should do it before a game. He goes, oh, no, Parcells would never go for that. He goes, when we do it, it'd have to be after the game. And so we said, let's go talk to our players, see what they think. So I go talk to my guys, and they're up for it. And he calls me back and goes, my guys are up for it. So we agreed we would pray after the game on Monday night. The game, matter of fact, both teams had lost the week before. So I think we were both 13-1 going into the game. Still the best records any teams had ever had on Monday night. And I can remember the game ending 7-3. We win. It was a very tough game. And you can imagine with Phil Simms' offense and Joe Montana's offense, that's not many points to score. And I look out the middle of the field and I go, man, there's a lot of guys meeting out there. But then I thought, they're not really praying. Ronnie Lott and Phil Simms got in a fight right on the 50-yard line, right where we were supposed to pray. And so a group of our guys moved down towards the 30-yard line, that end zone where Dwight Clark scored that touchdown. And no Giants are there. So they decide to kneel down and pray. No sooner do they kneel down to pray, two of the Giants come running in and pray. It was the first time it had ever happened. Now, December of 1990. Of course, it spread incredibly, kept going. We got threatened with a fine. The NFL said at their spring meetings, if you do that again, you guys are going to get a $75,000 fine. Both teams will. And the schedule comes out. We open the season Monday night with the New York Giants in New York. And our guys go out and pray again. So, we knew we could be in trouble. As a matter of fact, Mike Holmgren was our offensive coordinator and kind of the guy, kind of the point person in the team to be the for chapel. And Mike always sat next to me on the team plane, at least for a little while. We didn't have seats together, but he would sit with me. And I said, Mike, we prayed with the Giants. And he looked at me and goes, well, if I get fired, you're getting fired. I said, okay. So, but never heard anything from the NFL. And as a matter of fact, that year in 1990, the Giants beat us in the NFC Championship game, go to the Super Bowl 25, and a lot of Christians on the Bills, and the Bills and the Giants play. So the first time it ever happened at a Super Bowl was about 4 weeks later, Bills and Giants, and a lot of guys prayed at that. And that's part of why the NFL is like, oh, this is out of control already in just 3 weeks.
Sure.
So, That's how it started, with an idea in the shower.
I love it. So, Pat, when you watch an NFL game now, the clock, ticks to zero. And all of a sudden, here are all of these players in the center of an NFL field, kneeling down. They're praying. They're thanking God for all that has occurred and all that he is in their lives. What's that do for your heart?
Well, I'll tell you, I'm always thankful. And I think back onto that group of guys that first did it. And I always call them the founding fathers. These two guys from the Giants, Washington and Renee Thompson, and 49ers, Brent Jones, the late Dave Waymer, Ron Lewis, Steve Wallace, Guy McIntyre. And the fact that those guys would go out and actually do something nobody had ever done before was pretty incredible. And then to know that they were taking a risk with that fine the next year and on Monday Night Football, it's actually, somebody told me that what happened was They showed it on the camera, and Al Michaels said, "This is going to be a fine. The teams are not allowed to do this." And Frank Gifford, I'm so glad somebody sent me this clip. Frank Gifford said, "If they find these guys for this, with all the problems we have in this league, they are crazy."
Mm.
And the thing I will say, as much as I love it in pro football, college football's rosters are so big, and the attendance is even at a higher rate there.
Hmm.
Is you see stuff. I can remember we started that, in 1990, and I think it was New Year's Day the following year. I walked out of an elevator and had to walk through the bar area of a hotel, and the Orange Bowl was just ending, and it was something like, Oklahoma versus Florida State,
Mm.
and they had an aerial view, and about 100 guys from each team were praying.
Wow.
It went almost all the way down to the 20-yard line. They were a circle up the middle of the field. And I got to our meal room because we have a meal the night. This was on a Saturday night. We have a meal before our game on Monday. And I said, "You guys cannot believe what you started." I just saw the Goodyear blimp over the Orange Bowl and the massive numbers of guys
Mm.
from that bowl game ending in prayer. So the college game actually is even more impressive. Of course, I get notes all the time from soccer teams or baseball teams from all around the world that somehow know that I was involved in this, and they send me pictures. So now it's pretty phenomenal.
Yeah.
But that's God, that literally that was a little tiny mustard seed idea
Yeah.
in a shower one
Wow.
day.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've tried 100,000 things in ministry before that didn't. We could talk about that for 20 podcasts, but this one works, so I'm glad.
Yeah. Amen. Amen. Well, you know what, Pat? Here we are. It's a brand new year. The NFL playoffs are getting ready to, kick into high gear. And of course, the 49ers, wow, they're there again. But when you think about ministry during playoff time, and let's just talk to those sports chaplains, men and women who are listening to this conversation, and their teams are preparing for conference finals, for the NCAA tournament, with the NFL play, whatever it may be, and they need to get their team prepared. What could you tell them to encourage them during this very special time for players and coaches?
Well, I think the temptation is always to try to come up with a very big, enthusiastic, motivational speech. But the fact of the matter is, that's the coach's job. Your job is to be in touch with the spiritual needs of your team and to address them. Now, the thing I would do differently, and I think a lot of teams, like this, is like, if you're going to have a guest speaker, have somebody that will be excellent, and a lot of people will really be anxious to hear what they have to say.
Hmm.
Otherwise, you speak and speak exactly to the needs of the team and concern yourself less with the particular game, understanding the pressure, and that there's guys that don't usually come sometimes will start to come. I mean, I can remember our very first Super Bowl, we had a good group of 25 guys that came,
Hmm.
but we had now, so you're going back to 1982. I brought a guest speaker and a guy named Josh McDowell. Well, yeah, he wrote Evidence That Demands a Verdict. He was a well-known writer and speaker.
Yeah.
And had almost every player in the team came. A lot of guys that never came to chapel. Joe Montana came that time. Ronnie Lott didn't go to chapel back in those days.
Mm.
Dwight Clark. I mean, all those guys that were not typically chapel goers came to that Super Bowl because one player invited them all. I can still remember Josh McDowell. He brought his book More Than a Carpenter, and Joe Montana going up to get a book and ask him to autograph it. And Josh McDowell literally took the pen and grabbed it and goes, "And what's your name?" And Joe's looking over his shoulder. Joe Montana.
I love it. I love it. Well, Pat, man, it has been such a joy to visit with you and to hear your heart and to hear how the Lord has used your ministry in so many ways. You're not doing sports chaplaincy now, right? Do you miss it?
I get to mentor. I do. I'm a full-time consultant with Patrick Lencioni,
Hmm.
and so I some of my clients are professional sports teams. They're a lot of corporate clients. So I still working a lot in pro sports, but I also get to mentor some young coaches. And I really enjoy doing that. And my youngest daughter is an actress. And so I've been mentoring a lot of actors and singers.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
even though my full-time vocational career now is in management consulting, I'm going to probably move to about 25, 30, eventually 50% of my time just mentoring, again, actors and coaches that age group around 30s. There's some similarities. Again, they're young, they're high profile, they face a lot of the same temptations, a lot of the same challenges, and they need somebody they can trust who, frankly, isn't wowed by the fact that they're famous.
Yeah.
And they can just try, they just need authentic relationships. So I don't particularly miss pro sportsmen, but one thing I still have is, even though we have a great chaplain at the 49ers, the old guys, still see me as their team chaplain. So I was just at an event last week, and it's those older guys that still want to call, they talk, I was doing baby dedications and weddings, and now sadly I'm doing funerals every once in a while. But that's in 45 years that the ministry hasn't really stopped to all the 49ers. Those old guys still kind of see me that way.
Yeah, I can understand why. Hey, Pat, man, I appreciate your heart. I appreciate you. Thanks for all that you do. And thanks for spending some time with us today. And I know you'll be an encouragement to the many who are involved in sports ministry, and they want to make an impact for the kingdom. I know your words today have encouraged them. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, and these guys are doing a great job, by the way. Really
Yes, they
impressed
are.
with the work the guys are doing out there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Happy New Year to you, brother.
Yeah, Happy New Year to you as well.
Thanks for listening to Sports Chaplains Connect. Be sure and invite a colleague to listen in, and by all means, let's connect. Give us your thoughts on the podcast. Drop us an email at sportschaplainsconnect@gmail.com. That's sportschaplainsconnect@gmail.com. We'll see you next week when Sports Chaplains Connect.